Well, from the Iran issue to the new Israeli government's policies on the Palestinians and on judicial reforms, also growing voices on both the right and left in both political parties challenging the traditional close ties between the U.S. and Israel. You could say the past few months has been a time of testing for prominent American supporters of the Jewish state. And one of those is Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell of California, who rose to national prominence as a member of the House Intelligence Committee probing the links between the Trump campaign and Russia. He has also co-sponsored several Israel-related bills, including the Israel Anti-Boycott Act that aims to fight discriminatory boycotts that target the Jewish state. And he joins us now from Washington, D.C. Congressman, thank you for joining us on i24NEWS.
Have me on.
First, let me ask you, you supported the original Iran nuclear deal, efforts to have a revised version of it by the Biden administration. It looks like that's off the table for now. Do you still see diplomacy as an option, or what do you make of those voices in Israel that say now is the time that the West and the U.S. has to put a credible military threat against Iran's nuclear facility on the table?
Well, I'll start where we should end, which is that we can never allow Iran to have a nuclear weapon. We know their goal, their aim would be to destroy, the state of Israel, as well as other allies of Israel in the West. Now, how do we get there? I'd prefer the diplomatic path. As you said, it seems stalled right now, but that doesn't mean we're without the ability at the United Nations to continue to put the toughest sanctions in place on Iran if they're going to develop and enrich uranium and then weaponize that. I understand, Israel has a right to defend itself, but we also, I think, as one of the leaders in global alliances, should press, for a diplomatic solution and try and not see a kinetic response if we don't have to go there.
All right. I want to ask you, there are recent moves by the Netanyahu government regarding, say, the Palestinians, this judicial reforms going on in Israel have, to some degree, strained ties with the Biden administration. We've heard White House officials, others, talk about the question of shared values between Israel and the U.S. and whether that could be, to some degree, be endangered. What's your reaction to those developments?
Well, there's deep concern in the United States about Israel's drift, toward anti-democratic principles, these judicial reforms. And I was in the country when the first round was passed in the Knesset. It does concern us that lawmakers would be able to overturn an independent judiciary's decision. And I and my colleagues expressed this to the Prime Minister when we visited with him a couple weeks ago. And so that is a deep concern in the U.S. We're seeing, countries like Poland and Hungary and other great democracies starting to drift toward authoritarian streaks. And we don't want to see that happen to the great state of Israel, which we support. Now, on the two-state front, I remain, a two-state supporter for both countries to have peace, security, prosperity. I think the United States has always played the best and most impactful role at getting those two states, to directly, the Palestinians and the Israelis to directly talk. And I'd like to see us continue to play that role. And of course, that doesn't mean the Abraham Accords should not continue. That was a constructive development. But we cannot see, prosperity and opportunity for the Palestinian people left behind as we pursue that track.
Right. I mentioned your support of the sponsorship of the Israel Anti-Boycott Act. Do those developments in Israel, in some degree, make it harder for those like yourself in Washington and the U.S. who are trying to defend Israel against the BDS movement trying to illegitimize it?
I'll continue to defend Israel against the BDS movement. Again, I support a Jewish state, for Israel. However, if Israel starts to look like, Hungary and Poland and other governments that are going, far right, or even Turkey, it's going to be harder in the United States because we're seeing that anti-Semitism is already on the rise, and we're doing a lot in the United States to combat that. And we don't want to conflate, anti-Semitism, with, other issues that are going on with Israel that just make it harder for us to get young people, especially where we're seeing, a lot of anti-Semitism exist in America. We don't want to make it hard for the United States to support our greatest ally in the Middle East, Israel.
Well, you mentioned anti-Semitism, but even within both of the major political parties, on the Republican side, on the Democratic side, on the left, on the right, we're hearing unprecedented voices challenging the traditional support of the U.S. for Israel, some of it perhaps veering into anti-Semitism. But how do you respond to that, including, as I said before, in elements within your own party?
Again, the most important thing I think Israel can do is to show itself as a great democracy of the Middle East. If it starts to look less like a democracy, the concerns in the United States have nothing. There will be anti-Semitism that exists in the United States and all over the world. That's a problem. We have to combat it. But what we don't want is for there to be substantive, genuine attacks on Israel because it doesn't look like a democracy. And that's why I think those of us who love Israel, want it to be a Jewish state, will continue to advocate for it, to not allow these quote unquote judicial reforms to go through, because it makes it harder for us, of course, to defend Israel. And we want Israel to thrive. We want a Palestinian state to coexist. And we fear that this takes us farther from that if it persists.
Right. Now, of course, some of the anti-Semitism you're referring to is really not connected with Israel. It's more traditional anti-Semitism, domestically challenging Jewish communities in the U.S. You've sponsored and been a part of some resolutions and bills to try to contend with it. What do you think practically needs to be done on the governmental level, the congressional, federal level to deal with this phenomena?
At home, we need to first protect our Jewish American community and expanding what's called a nonprofit grant program that allows synagogues and Jewish organizations to secure and protect their parishioners and the people who are a part of their organizations. So giving them more ability to defend themselves, and then with young people, at the earliest of ages, teaching, about the Jewish faith, making sure that we don't strip out, the Holocaust from our education. And there are those on the Republican Party right now who are in the business of banning books and trying to dictate from Washington or state houses what teachers should teach our students. And so again, awareness and knowledge, I think, is the best sanitizer against anti-Semitism.
All right, I want to go back. You mentioned the Abraham Accords. I want to go back to that. Reports today in the Israeli media of talks to try to bring other countries into it. There are those who feel and who have said they feel the road to expanding the Abraham Accords has to run through Washington with some of these countries, be it Saudi Arabia, the administration somehow repairing ties with it, dealing with some of these other countries. Is the Biden administration doing enough, in your sense, to try to bring more countries into the Abraham Accords?
Yes, I believe Secretary Blinken is committed, to doing that. And it was your organization, you're being humble, that broke some of these stories this morning about Indonesia and others potentially joining, which would be, great for Israel, great for the rest of the world. Indonesia is the largest, Muslim country in the world, 200+ million people. But again, I don't want this to be a way that we go around and never have a two-state solution. So these accords are important if they can get us to a two-state solution. I support that. But if this is a way to just isolate and choke off the Palestinian people, from clean water, clean air, freedom of prosperity and equality and safety, then I do worry that that issue will be forgotten. And again, you could lose support for the state of Israel in the United States. So I want to see that parallel track continue. And I think the Biden administration has shown that U.S. leadership, when it's at the table, can be quite constructive.
Right. And Congressman, I do have to ask you one question about domestic U.S. politics. You contended for the presidency. I mean, how do you see the 2024 campaign? We're now coming on to it. What are your own plans, and how do you see your party and your incumbent in the White House and the challenges he is going to face in the coming election?
Well, he has to finish the job, as he said at the State of the Union, and he's done a hell of a job so far, in the first 2 years coming out of COVID, getting us back to work, kids back to school, including my kids, thank God, but also reopening our main streets, and then investing in jobs and infrastructure, a gun safety bill that we haven't seen in 30 years, competing with China on the CHIPS Act. We've done a lot in just the first 2 years of the Biden administration. But when it comes to, taking on climate, making sure that we have background checks, making sure that we have paid family leave for all. There's a lot more to do, and the president is up for it. I'm behind him, and I think his opponent, whoever it is, will probably be from the far extreme right. And the American people rejected that in the midterms, and I expect that they'll choose, freedom and prosperity over fear and violence in 2024.
Okay, Congressman, you didn't even talk about your own prospects. I know there is a senatorial.
Oh, I have the antibodies for that.
Okay, I do know there's a Senate seat opening up in California. Perhaps you have your eye on that. But
I'm all behind Adam Schiff on that one. So.
Okay, Representative Eric Swalwell, thank you so much for joining us on i24 News.